Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Super Dandori Bros Podcast, episode 10. We finally made it to episode 10.
Double digits.
Double digits. Thank you for everyone who's been listening. We appreciate it. And we got a fun episode in store for you today. I'm going to let Ryan introduce it because he's the one who came up with the idea. And let us know. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, sure. So we've talked sort of about general Nintendo topics of either top 10, whatever, or, things we like to see, favorite, whatever from each generation. But I thought it might be fun to occasionally do sort of a more focused podcast. And so what I decided that I wanted to pitch today was my idea for a Metroid Fusion remake, which may be jumping the gun a little bit. We still don't have a Super Metroid remake. But I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think it's at least interesting enough to discuss.
Okay, Metroid Fusion is, I think, the first Metroid game I ever played back when I got my first Nintendo system, which was a Game Boy Advance. I remember seeing the cover in Toys R Us, back when Toys R Us was a thing. Mm-hmm. And I thought that looked kind of cool, and I took it home, played it, and it blew my mind.
It's amazing.
I know it's interesting to say that because for a lot of people, Metroid Fusion was actually, they didn't like it as much. It was a more linear game, had more instructions, more talking, less of that atmosphere of Super Metroid. But, as a kid who doesn't know any of that stuff, it's a super fun game. And even going back as an adult, I do still appreciate a lot about what Metroid Fusion brought to the table. It's just a very snappy, fun, inventive game. It did something different with the franchise, but it is getting older. It came out 2001, so it's up there in age now.
It is.
And it'd be fun to revisit it and see if they could adjust it, flesh it out more, make it longer, fix some things. But I'm curious, though, since this is a subject that you brought up, what is your first thing that you what made you want to talk about Metroid Fusion? What makes you want it to be remade?
So it's one of the first ones I played as well. So it technically is actually the first Metroid game I played. And specifically when I was 10, one of my friends had the cartridge, and I think it had been out for a while at that point. And he was playing it at school, and he's like, "Oh, I'm having a hard time beating this boss," and it was Ceres, the serpent. And he's like, "Can you do it for me?" And so he just handed it to me, and I beat it second try. Which I was really surprised because I wasn't that great at video games, but I found the strategy where you sit in the corner by accident, and that's actually how I beat it. But I really enjoyed it, and it always stuck with me. Eventually, I think I played Zero Mission next, all the way through, and then the first one I actually owned was Fusion. I'd borrowed Zero Mission, so it's near and dear to my heart because it's one of the first few I played. It's the first one I owned. I got it at the same time as Metroid Prime, actually, same year, and it's it's one that's really stuck with me over the years. But there are a few things that I think would be good to, if you're going to revisit it, there are some things that you can improve upon. So some of the common complaints that I hear about Metroid Fusion, like you said, it's in some ways too linear, in some ways it's too structured. I think that does serve a story purpose. So I'm only going to let up on that a little bit in my pitch for a remake. And a lot of the story is going to remain the same, but I think that there's some things that we have the technology to add now that I'd really like to do. So I think one of the first and biggest changes that I want to make is none of the upgrades make any sense in Metroid Fusion. Because this is an artificial space station, why is there Chozo tech hidden randomly on the ship? It doesn't make any sense. And so I want to pitch that you totally overhaul the upgrade system. And instead of having a missile tank here or an energy tank there or whatever, as you progress, you go into areas where you see there's an upgrade, and it's established that the power suit has organic components, right? And so let's just say, for all intents and purposes, there are X that have learned to copy this. And so these would be special X that you fight in an area, and they'd be easy to find, but you still have the puzzle of finding it and getting to it, but then you have to fight and kill it and absorb it. And that is essentially the equivalent of experience points. But it's more like skill points that you could slot in. So it's the first Metroid RPG where you get to build Samus in whatever way you want, as you go along. Now, granted, certain special abilities are going to be locked behind bosses. You don't get, an ability out of the blue, but like your missile, your incremental upgrades that you get, like missile tanks and energy tanks and power bomb tanks, those will require you to dump skill points in by exploring it. I think that this makes a lot more sense with Fusion's narrative. And I think it opens up an opportunity for like RPG elements. So before I continue, what are your thoughts on that?
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's pretty impressive, like overhaul. I never even considered overhauling the upgrade system, but it is kind of one of those things that's been very repeated in almost every Metroid game. It would be interesting to see them, yeah, just take a new approach. And considering that's what they've been doing with some of these other franchises with different upgrades, like Pikmin 4 had more, upgrade system, and obviously Breath of the Wild is a lot more like, more player choice. I can see them doing something like that, especially in a game that needs a little bit more of it. But I don't know. Some people, obviously, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I don't know. That's it. I try to think of how if that affects the story at all. Like, if I'm thinking, I'm like trying to remember every part of the game, and if that would really like change it. I guess you'd have to fix any of those things too.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just incremental upgrades, like you couldn't purchase the high jump boots, for example, or you couldn't purchase like bombs early or anything like that. So there would be no sequence breaking for it. It would just be for the upgrades that make you just inherently like more powerful because you can tank more damage or have more missile capacity. Now, granted, I'm also interested in the idea of maybe extending that to other things where maybe like you can increase beam damage, for example, or decrease charge time. Like there are some things that you could start to do with this where once you open the door, you might be able to play with it a little bit. And I think that it works very well with the fact that Super Metroid is so open. You can, you're basically free to go as soon as you get off the ship, which is great, and that allows for an element of exploration. Whereas Fusion, part of the narrative is now Samus is being controlled and directed. So she's lost her agency there, but then to give her agency back in how she regrows her powers might be, a little bit of nuance to the story that you wouldn't get in the original game, obviously, but you could have in the remake. And then sort of coupled to that, it potentially changes depending on your encounters with the SAX, which I have another thought for, at the time. But, if you have an encounter with the SAX coming up, you might be like, okay, well, I know that, my health is a little bit low. So maybe I'm going to go out of my way to like go collect some upgrades for health. And you don't have to go to specific puzzles. You can just go find some upgrade points and spend them however you like. It also, sort of, increases potentially, which granted is not necessarily a huge segment of the market or Nintendo's first consideration when they're making a new game, but it really opens up an interesting opportunity for like some challenge runs and speed running on the back end, because now you have a lot more adjustable knobs on like what to get when and like what that does for you. So I think there's like some actually really cool opportunities on the back end of that.
Yeah, no, that's true. I was thinking though, from a narrative standpoint, there are points in the game where you getting certain abilities affects the narrative because, like I remember the fusion missile, you're like not supposed to get it, right? But you accidentally bypassed and get it. So I'm curious how they would. I guess you're saying it's the agency comes mostly from just the like how much like your weapons and your health and ammo, kind of not from what abilities you get, right?
Correct. Though you could also make an argument that as a bonus mode, maybe there is like fully unlocked ability to purchase. So like when you beat a boss, you get an upgrade of your choice. So not as the primary story, but as like a bonus mode at the end. Like I could see that. Whether or not that's like likely to be included in a Fusion remake, probably not. None of this is actually likely.
No, I could see some of these things working really well in a new Metroid game too, because like say, there's a point where you get like, I don't know, like where there is a place where you could get Chozo artifacts. Like you go back to you and you have like some artifact from the Chozo that allows you to then exchange it for something like, but on the space station, it does need to be kind of probably more kept to the X parasite as far as how you get your abilities, because that makes more sense narratively as well. But yeah, I'm thinking like that definitely changes things a lot. And it would be kind of cool to see them experiment with it. What else do you have thinking about? Like,
So just departing from the upgrade path, which I think in and of itself is already a pretty big departure from the original game, I would sort of want to overhaul the SAX as well. And what I like to do, and credit where credit is due, the Metroid podcast originally sort of gave me this idea, where you sort of leverage the technology behind Emmy rooms, and instead of the Emmy, you have the SAX patrolling. And so you actually do have a pretty good shot at running into the SAX at like different points in the story just by exploring. It's not scripted the way that it is in the Game Boy Advance. And this makes for a much better like prey-predator situation with the SAX, because ultimately you are weaker in the beginning. And I also have some other things I'd like to change on towards the end of the game as well with the SAX. Which, granted, by the spoilers for Metroid Fusion, by the way, anybody who somehow hasn't played it in the past 25 years. But in particular, I think leveraging the Emmy room to have those tense moments where you're being chased, but maybe, and this is again getting into story spoilers, you need to have that cutoff that Samus can get through in order to like escape the SAX, kind of like you can escape the Emmy room. Here's my pitch for that. You foreshadow the Federation growing Metroids by having them leverage a technology that somehow creates a barrier against the X. It goes totally unexplained in the beginning, but it turns out it's leveraging the similar processes that Metroids use to drain energy, and they're the natural predator of the X. And that is a natural barrier to stopping the SAX, and that allows you to cut the tension while still somewhat working within the world. What do you think of that?
that would be interesting. I'd be curious to see how they could implement that and still kind of keep it somewhat of a secret. I was also thinking that at some point in Metroid Fusion, they do mention that there's multiple SAX. And I was thinking that like it'd be more almost like a foreshadowing that there are these areas where like either the, and I don't know, 'cause the one thing the hard part of the Emmy rooms is that you saw the doors and you just immediately knew you're going into an Emmy room. I would almost love it to be something where you don't, the only way you know you're going into a room where the SAX could be is based on like music or audio cues or just certain things where even if like the music doesn't change, but there's like certain subtle sounds that get added to the soundtrack. Well, not just the footsteps, but I don't know, just some like a musical tone shift.
Yes.
Where it's like it's subtle, and the closer you get, the more the music starts to distort, and like even because so it seems like everything's normal, but then distortion starts to come in. But you don't. But I mean, I think from a development like programming standpoint, there will be technical zones where the SAX are traveling, but you won't necessarily know that as you're exploring the world, and you'll just think that it's the same SAX the whole time. You're just like, I keep running into this guy. You don't realize that it's multiple, but it's kind of the way the Emmy were, where there was multiple zones with Emmy and you had to defeat them. But this way, it's like just these SAX zones. So you get to run into the SAX more, creates more fun, cat and mouse kind of situation where you're trying to avoid, and it incentivizes sneaky routes. And it would be also interesting if they started creating puzzles around the new items you get that you have to use in order to avoid the SAX. So it's not just, okay, I went through this spot and I just watched the SX slowly walk away and I'm scared. It's like, no, you have to be actively using the new ability you got in order to stay one step ahead or stay in the dark, away from the SAX. So that way it just makes it a little bit more of an engaging, like, scary moment where it's like you're not, because like most of the times when I remember seeing the SAX, I would like fall down somewhere and then you just hear it and see it. And as long as you don't move, it just goes away. Or like there's a part where you're in that morph ball and I think either you fall into something and then you go back and then you see the SAX, it uses a power bomb. And it's like, it's just not, like it's scary. Like as a kid I was scared, but I'm thinking in my head like, there's only that one moment where you really have to run, right? And it's like and it's in that grass area or where the environmental stuff is.
Yeah, Sector 2.
Sector 2.
Like it's like right after or before you get the plasma beam, I'm not sure.
Yes, before you get the plasma beam. And that's the only time I remember it being like really engaged, active, like running. And I want more of that. Well, I'd like not more specifically of just running for your life. I think that I want some of that, but also some of it where it's like if you don't continue moving, you will get caught. But not because the SAX sees you, but because the SX is moving in that direction. And so you either have to use your bombs correctly, your missiles correctly, your beams correctly, or I'm trying to think of other abilities. You don't get the grapple beam. I wish they gave that in Metroid Fusion. I mean, if they fully remake it, I guess there's nothing off the table. They could just change everything. So I guess in my head, I'm still trying to keep it within the confines of what the game was, because at a certain point, if you go too far away, it's not really Metroid Fusion anymore. But I think that would be kind of fun though, where you get new abilities and you use those abilities. So yeah, I don't know.
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of opportunities that you have with the SAX that you weren't able to do before. So one thought I had, you mentioned you walk into an enemy room in Dread, there's an enemy there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one of the ways that you could sort of fix that is most of the map is SAX territory, but you never know if they're actually going to be there or in a different one. So there are connectors between them that the SAX doesn't know how to go through or whatever, but you can, and you just never know which one of them the SAX is in. And then, like you said, as you get closer, then you maybe you start to hear the footsteps, the music changes, the whole atmosphere changes. And I think that that's a way to give you the tension that you want, and also sort of an interesting way of, on higher difficulty modes, maybe making encounters a little bit more frequent, for example, and leveraging that strength of Fusion. But I think it leans into the atmosphere a little bit more heavily.
Yeah, but you know how in Fusion 2, there's certain parts where the SAX actually destroys the environment, right? It affects the way you can go in the world. Is that something you could see as being a new dynamic aspect to the game, where the map is constantly changing because the SAX is destroying or opening new ways to move around the map? So when you enter an area that you've already been, you don't know if you're going to be able to navigate the same way, because maybe this path has been blown up, or maybe a new opening and you might discover something. I mean, I don't know, what do you think of that?
I think that's a great idea, because I think that some of the coolest moments in Fusion are when, and it's not just the SAX, but the security robot as well, destroys some parts of the ship. Nightmare destroys some parts of the ship. I think having those permanent changes to the map is really cool. And what I'd also like to do as just a smaller change, in Metroid Dread, when you destroyed a speed block, it was gone for good. And I think that you should be able to do something like that here as well, where you get to the point where you're powerful enough that you can clear some of this debris and then it's just gone. And so then you sort of reach the same power level, and you can slowly see Samus, she gets and granted, maybe not all the blocks, because maybe you need it for a puzzle or something, but for a lot of the things that used to obstruct you, now you can get through them. And I think that contributes something to it from a gameplay standpoint, but also from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah. I was thinking too, just this kind of came to me as I was thinking too, because there's a part of me that's I'd love to have dynamic destruction, but it also would be interesting if they introduced some function where the ship is trying to repair itself. So certain areas that were destroyed actually come back to and been repaired by little robots. So it's constantly changing. You cannot predict, which I guess could be annoying, because if you're trying to take a path somewhere, but maybe they introduce certain fast travel mechanics, so it's not oh crap, I have to go the long way around. It doesn't destroy backtracking, but it makes each engagement in those areas, especially when you have to escape from the SAX, just that little bit more dynamic. You can't always trust that those areas will be available. And so I don't know, there's just so many ideas I'm thinking of. I love the idea of just being a dynamic world where it's just not quite set in stone. You have to constantly be on your toes, figuring new things out. And maybe you have some system that helps you at least be alerted that something has changed in the world, maybe before you go in, so you're not always caught off guard. But you just want something it's not so predictable. And if you could replay the game and it's procedurally changing, it's not scripted how this is going to happen. There's a procedural nature to it, where all the SAX zones are in flux. Not crazy, they're just completely melting the rooms and restructuring, but just different paths continually change because either SAX blew a hole through it, and then the robots fixed it, and then I don't know, just constantly you don't know which way to go.
Absolutely. I think that would be like a phenomenal way to replay Fusion and would make it a very interesting dynamic between you and the SAX. But that actually feeds really well into another change I'd like to make, which is, and I'm kind of go back and forth on this. I feel like maybe you still need to have them occasionally for certain moments in the story, and you'll understand what I mean. I would mostly want to get rid of navigation rooms. Navigation
Yeah.
rooms completely shut down the action of the game. They slow you down. Instead, we have voice acting now. Let Adam talk to you over comms, like in your helmet, so you hear him update you in real time. And so then if something gets shut down, by the SAX and it no longer works, like let's say an elevator is out of commission or something like that, then he can update you and say, hey, this elevator from the, is no longer working or whatever. And granted, this almost in some ways sounds like almost like an entirely new game that you'd have to build from the ground up. But at the same time, like, I think that it's such an interesting idea for what to do with Fusion. It's at least cool to talk about. But I think that change to Adam in particular would make him more palatable. I think he's critical from a story standpoint. And I don't even just mean like who he ends up being, but like at the same time just taking away, because the entire point of the game is Samus has no agency now. That she was essentially rebuilt by the Federation. She has certain limitations that she didn't have before. And she has to learn how to fight this thing while also in some ways fighting the Federation at the same time.
True. It'd be interesting if, like, when you're coming down the elevators, that's when he starts filling you in on information. So the elevator loading time is kind of turned into the navigation room. And then as you're even passing through, like, he could still be talking to you, but, like, use up that loading time with, exposition and information and stuff. Like, so it's almost like he's giving you the mission update as you're heading into the mission versus, having to stop. I really do like that. It streamlines the game more, and it sounds a little bit more like what would actually happen, where you'd have like almost like it's almost like Master Chief AI Cortana kind of thing.
Yeah.
But not quite. But having someone kind of like give you the directions, and if they wanted to go more like, I don't want to go other M levels of it, but you could almost see like more of the personality of Samus, who's frustrated by her loss of agency, and maybe you get a few scenes where maybe in the elevator ride you get a close-up of her listening to her talk or to talking to Adam and getting more of that. And because it is a little bit more of a story-driven game, it would be interesting to see what they could do with that from a narrative perspective, but hopefully without completely breaking the flow. But utilize, I don't know, load times or something. I don't know. If it's on the Switch too, the load times are probably not going to be that bad because I think it's all going to be faster, but I don't know.
Which I think if we learned one thing from Pikmin 4's intro, it's that people value being able to skip stuff. So even if the Switch loads in and the cinematic or whatever isn't done yet, as long as you're able to skip it, I don't think people would mind.
So here's another thing too. I don't know. So this is kind of sound kind of weird, but you know how in Fire Emblem you can choose to not watch the fights? You could just have your characters come up to each other, just engage, do the damage, and everything.
The only mode that I keep on modern Fire Emblem games now when I do play them.
Yeah, because what if like that was a toggle that they ever added to a game where you could basically like streamline narrative parts, because there are parts where you do need to get some level of information before you go into a map because it's kind of explained to you what your mission is, but you could like have a TLDR version, or if you wanted the full like slow down story and you get more of that voice acting engagement, you could just leave that on, but it's like a toggle. It's like at the beginning game, it's like, are you a hardcore player, or like are you a casual who just wants to use? Are you in it for the story or for the gameplay? Doesn't mean if you do story you don't get the gameplay, but like you could kind of, and it would explain to you like what each one is.
Yeah,
that'd be kind of cool, because then I think there's players that definitely just want to like get straight into it, don't care, and especially because Metroid is kind of known for being a very much like, you look at Dread, there's very little voice acting in it. It's very like to the point. It's same with Super Metroid. Most Metroid games, only 3 Metroid games have really had a lot of dialogue. And that's Fusion, Prime 3, and Other M. Actually, I don't know about Federation Force. I can't speak to it.
Yeah, I actually don't know about that either.
But even that's still not Samus. But point is that I think there's people like me that do really enjoy the story aspect and wouldn't mind getting like a little bit more of a narrative side to it. But I also think that it's fair to be able to skip it, or just not even, and keep it more, basic mode. I I don't know. I just feel like what we're end up doing is we're just basically building our dream Metroid game.
Yeah, pretty much, though I think within the construct of
Fusion.
Fusion's story
I think
and the setting.
Yeah, because I think what we're trying to do to a certain extent, I don't want to say redeem Fusion because I love Fusion the way it is, but for those who found it to be more like too linear, too, kind of give it more purpose and reason, and yeah, I don't know. It's kind of it's a lot of options. It just would be fun to see them revisit it and kind of like, it's like almost like it's a remake / retelling kind of thing. But
Well, kind of like how Zero Mission totally redid the map for Metroid 1, and it added an entire act onto the end, like
That's
new bosses and
true.
everything. So really and I mean, Samus Returns was pretty much, I mean, my understanding is, I'm not particularly familiar with the original Metroid 2 map. My understanding is it's a pretty big departure from it. We know like for a fact that Samus Returns has added bosses, for example. I've only played like part of Metroid 2, like the original, but I've played all of Samus Returns multiple times. And so I think when they do go back, and granted those are very old games that really needed a lot of work, and Super Metroid is sort of the first time that you really get somewhere where the game really does still hold up really well. It's just the controls, and I do think, I mentioned at the top of the podcast, like this episode, I do think that Super Metroid deserves a remake treatment only for small quality of life improvements, like add a little bit more detail to the map, like the sort of stuff that was available in like Fusion and Beyond, and fix the angle controls and missile control, like all of that, like just fix the controls. And I honestly think that the game is like fine the way it is. So I think even just small quality of life improvements like work. But if you're gonna like revisit it, I wouldn't mind a graphical upgrade too.
Oh yeah, especially on the Switch 2. Could you
Yeah.
imagine?
Oh man, it looks so good.
It just, yeah. I think that the particle effects and the lighting they could do on that, just to give it the atmosphere that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I definitely think controls. Now, do you think that when you say controls, though, would you think that they would implement some of the things that they've brought in some of the new Metro games, like parrying and sliding, or would that break the game?
Are we talking Fusion or Super?
Well, I kind of say both.
And both. I mean, I would be fine with both because I really like the way Dread plays. Mm-hmm. I think Dread plays really, really well. I think the sliding makes sense in the context of Fusion and Dread because the suit is now leaner. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that Zero Mission changed is that Samus could grab ledges with the power grip. Previously, she wasn't able to do that. And the first one where she was able to do that was in Fusion. The rationale was the suit wasn't as heavy anymore. And so then she could actually pull herself up and became more acrobatic, but she also started to take more damage. So that's why in Fusion and Dread, she's more of an acrobat than she was in the original games. And that's why your jump is shorter in Zero Mission, for example. And so the way that I look at it is that I'm fine with them. I think the parry works really, really well personally. I think it's because if Metroid's going to have a melee, like it's probably going to be something like that. And actually, there's a pitch I have for Metroid 6 actually for that, but I think that would be for another episode. But I would include the slide. I think the slide works really well in escape sequences, and if we're pitching the SAX like Samus interaction as core to the Fusion experience now, as opposed to probably the most memorable part of the game, but really only takes place over the course of like a couple minutes, then I think that the slide makes a ton of sense for that. Pairing a little less so at the SAX, but I think that it plays so well in general that I would just keep it. Mm-hmm. But that's just my opinion. One thing that I did want to bring up, just talking about options in general, is there are moments of the story that I would change. And for a lot of Fusion, you're sort of going from problem to problem and fixing them. And I think, like I said, the loss of agency is critical to the story being told. I do think that for the sake of the gameplay experience, it does make sense to occasionally open it up a little bit. So I would have certain parts of the story where, say, 3 things need to be done. And you can do them in any order. You need to fix this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this. But the order in which you tackle them decides the difficulty and the stakes So, like, for example, there's one part in the original Fusion where all of a sudden, the station's overheating and it's going to explode. I would instead pitch that there are three things that Samus needs to tackle, and something like that, a timer escape sequence you have to get there, would always be saved for whatever the third one was, and it would be unique to that particular task. So, like, for example, in that particular case, if you left the fire thing that you had to do for last, then you would have to deal with the ship potentially blowing up. Maybe if you were dealing with, the thing in Sector 1 where it blocks all the air vents, maybe you've, like, run out of oxygen. You don't have much time left before, Samus suffocates, or any humans left, suffocate. Maybe, like, another one is, like, the power goes out or something and the ship is losing altitude and is going to, or like it needs to redirect course because it's going to hit an asteroid or something like that. Some escape sequence, and whatever the stakes are that because you saved that one option for last. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I think it adds like some replay value in a way where you can just go back and say like, oh, I want to, try a different order on this time, like beat this boss a little bit earlier, or beat, whatever. And I think it could be really interesting.
I think also too, you would get power-ups probably from each completion, so you would have different abilities based on which one you left for last. So it would change the way the missions played. So
Absolutely.
if you played, like I said, the fire one first, you would have whatever ability. I think that was the wide beam.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You'd have that and then the final mission would know that you're going to have the wide beam, like with the countdown. So it would change the dynamic of how you complete it based on the fact that you would now are going to have these two abilities.
Absolutely.
So it kind of knows which abilities you'll have based on it, so it'd be kind of cool. I think it gives a really dynamic way to play the game. And then if you add that with the fact that you can adjust, like you said, the agency of controlling your ammo and health and things like that. Do you kind of look at that the same way as like Breath of the Wild, where you have like stamina and health kind of like as a thing, where the fact that you can actually adjust one for the other?
I envision that could be something, like, it's not something that I've like decided one way or another I prefer, because in some ways I sort of like the idea of once you lock in an upgrade, like you are locked in. I sort of like that. And granted, you're going to be able to get everything, and maybe that would even be a potentially like part of a higher difficulty is you can't get everything. Like maybe you only get half as many upgrade points, for example, like they count for half, and you really have to pick and choose what you want to prioritize in a hard mode. Like, do you want to prioritize dodging, which, I mean, granted, you pretty much have to do in Fusion anyway, and just max out on missiles so you can just, like, nuke the boss? Or are you not as confident and you feel like you need a little bit more survivability? And maybe
then you have to focus on accuracy.
Yep. And so that's, I guess, like, I just envision that is what a Metroid Fusion could have in terms of like how the stats integrate with difficulty and integrate with like the order in which you do things. And I think that it all sort of like fits together narratively as well.
No, that sounds good to me. I'd really love all these ideas. This is super fun.
I have one more pitch for you.
Okay.
So for this is the last thing that I'd want to change. And you mentioned it earlier. There are 10 SAX at the end of the game. I would want you to be able to hunt down 7 of them.
So you would find out there's more than one earlier in the game, because you don't find that out till like very late in the game.
And it is end game, and it has to be end game for you to go fight these things.
Oh, so this is kind of like late game, not fetch quest, but kind of fetch quest?
This is sort of the Proteus Ridley battle, or the third act of Zero Mission. The thing that's added on the end that's sort of the surprise. And I would want you to be able to go hunt these down. And these don't like give you upgrades or anything. There's nothing like special you get from them, like in terms of a gameplay standpoint. But this is like, these would be like bonus artwork or something that you unlock. So completionists would still want to like do it or something. But there's nothing about doing it that makes you more powerful. But you need to differentiate it from the final boss. And so for that, I would want 3 SAX at once, the remaining 3.
Wait, so it's optional to hunt them down?
Optional to hunt them down.
Okay.
So it's like a side quest, and you can just do it for completionist's sake if you want. Extra things to fight. Maybe they each fight a bit differently. Maybe like one of them, uses power bombs more often than the others, or maybe based on the arena that you fight them in, one of them can activate speed booster, easily, or something, something like that. You could get creative with it.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's such a funny thing having it be an optional thing, because in my head I'm like, man, that'd be so cool if you just like had to fight them.
I mean, I'm also fine with it being required, but I also want to envision like what would Metroid be with side quests.
Yeah, it's true. If it's like just all optional, because I think from a narrative standpoint, like there's no incentive to go hunt them down.
Yeah, no, absolutely none.
So, and there's no, how would you even know that you could go hunt them down without it being like a very, like, would it be a side mission or like an Easter egg?
I think it's like an Easter egg. I think you find them and you can, and maybe like, I don't know, maybe there would be a reward for it. Maybe you get like, there's like a special X behind it and you get some upgrade points or something, but you wouldn't get the ice beam from it, is my point. The ice beam would still be saved for the Omega Metroid fight, which also you would also overhaul.
So maybe what you could do is like each SAX has certain abilities, but they all have some unique, like you said, they might focus on something, but maybe that's because that's what they have. But you also don't want that to be the way you unlock abilities, just by constantly fighting yourself over and over again.
No, and that's why I would save it for the end. Then you get a slightly different version of the fight, and I don't know, like.
I'm just thinking like
saying?
It could be one of those things where you have to defeat them because in order to get to a certain area, maybe, or like because they are guarding a certain thing that you need to, because in order
best
to
ending.
Well, there's best ending, but also I was gonna say like, well, best ending could be you hunt all of them down, but maybe there's a required like 3 that you have to get. So because in order to get to the unlock the room that you need to initiate the ship falling to the planet, there's like, it's they don't want anybody to be able to go up there and do it. So there's like 3 specific keys you have to activate, and each one is being guarded by an SAX with different abilities, and so you have to defeat them. And they try to make the fights interesting, and also because they're still X parasites, the first phase of each fight would be somewhat like I'm just fighting myself, but they focus on speed boost or they focus on power bombs or something. But then the second phase of the fight, it always morphs into some other creature that's like completely different, and they have completely different telegraphed attacks.
Okay, here's a pitch for you. Second phase is one of the Super Metroid bosses.
Like an X version of like Kraid, or X version of Ridley, X version of...
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have X Ridley. Maybe you cut that fight, and so then you save it for one of these.
That's true. I mean, if you're remaking one.
But yeah, like X Mother Brain, X Crocomire.
Yeah.
X, I can't believe I'm forgetting.
Well, because here's the thing,
Dragon.
right? The X tend to take on their host, but like, wouldn't the X have Samus's memories of those fights?
They would have Samus's memories, but also in Metroid Other M, which granted I don't like referencing Other M for lore, but they do recover DNA from the surface of Samus's suit, and that's how they're able to like recreate the baby Metroid, for example. But the like you could hypothetically say, yeah, like she had DNA on her from the fights that she was in, and when the X took over, like they found that DNA, and so then they can switch into it at will. But maybe like because there was so much, I don't know, you could come up with some lore reason, then they only get 1 second form each. And because they divided asexually or whatever, they like it wasn't a perfect copy, and they only get Ridley, or they only get Kraid, or they only get Crocomire, for example.
Yeah. And then, because then it leads into the final one, which is an Omega Metroid. So it's kind of like, well, no, sorry, SX doesn't fight the Omega Metroid. What is the monster it turns into?
I don't think it has a name.
But it's kind of its own unique entity, right? I guess. So it'd be like, it's not Omega X, but it'd come up with some name for it, right?
Yeah, you just give it something.
But that's the primary SX, the original. I don't know. I'm just trying to think. There's like so many different ways you could do it, because I'm thinking like, because you don't want the fights to be repetitive, because if you're just hunting down the SAX and the only difference is just which power they focus on, you're going to feel like... So yeah, I understand why you'd want to do it as like a side quest, because otherwise it feels like a repetitive chore at the end game. And that's what Nintendo tends to, unfortunately, sometimes do sometimes, is create these repetitive tasks. Like it's like almost like they ran out of story, so they quickly padded it with some extra stuff at the end, like Wind Waker. When you're fighting,
oh yeah, gosh,
those kind of things where you're just like you're just hunting down stuff for the sake of it, because
strangely a lot of GameCube games,
there's a lot of GameCube games did that. Yeah, so that's what you want to avoid. So you got to find ways to make it more fun and interesting, But then, yeah, if you want to, for extra clout and perfect ending, you hunt down like all the SAX.
Well,
Why
and
limit it to just? Oh, you said fight 3 at once at the end.
yeah,
How would that play out?
I have no idea. It just sounds chaotic, and I kind of like the idea of it
Yeah,
because you can cheese the SAX in its current form into one particular pattern and defeat it actually quite easily.
that's true.
So I mean, granted, you wouldn't have the AI be exactly the same.
Well, I was thinking too, you could almost trick them into hitting each other. One has the ice beam. It's like you actually have that's part of the telegraph attack kind of thing.
Yeah, and maybe diffusion missiles can freeze some of them for a bit longer than they do in the standard
Yeah,
fusion.
you'll know which one's the primary SAX because it doesn't freeze for as long and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
something like that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely creative ways, and if anyone can come up with it, it's Nintendo
Oh,
or
absolutely.
us though, because we're
Well, yeah,
pretty
clearly.
yeah,
I mean,
we've clearly figured out the formula.
absolutely. And of course, there's I don't know if we have enough time to get into it, but I do have a pitch for which you've already sort of heard at least some about for a Metroid Fusion like multiplayer experience.
Oh, I think we do need to talk about that. I think since we're on the topic of Fusion, and it's so heavily inspired by Fusion, you kind of have to.
Okay, so just as an extra bonus for replay value, and because to my knowledge, there's not really much like it out there. Here's my pitch for a Metroid Fusion multiplayer. It would be probably like 8 players, and essentially you would be running through parts of the ship that sort of get jumbled together at least somewhat randomly, but they're rooms that you at least somewhat recognize, but with some modifications. And it's not always the same room every time, like some of the secret passageways, for example, between rooms may exist in some versions of the map and may not in others. And so then you can't just learn the map perfectly every time. There's at least some variability. And you don't necessarily know what's behind the next door. And so my pitch is you spawn 8 players in a room, and it's deathmatch, no teams, and located throughout the map are different upgrades for Samus. Wave beam here, ice beam there, super missiles, power bombs, whatever, and they're picked randomly. I don't know how many there would be. I'd have to work it out, and it probably depends on the size of the map. And the players start hunting each other down. And so some players will find the wave beam and can shoot through walls and have an advantage that way. But maybe after it goes through walls, it does less damage, for example. Whereas if a super missile player is able to get a clean line of sight, they can do a lot of damage really quickly. And as you kill the players, you absorb whatever abilities that they had. And so then over time, in theory, this wouldn't work out every time, obviously, you would end up with 2 players of about equal power level, but with completely different sets of abilities, duking it out in the center. And you can have whatever, mechanism, sort of like how Fortnite, I haven't played much Fortnite, I like 1 or 2 matches, but the map sort of condenses to drive people in the middle. You can sort of do something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Where as upgrades are collected, then you sort of have to start moving towards the middle. And then eventually, it will just be 2 head-to-head until there's only 1 person left standing. And so it's a little bit of hide and seek because you can run from players and maybe hide from them if you find like a secret passageway that they didn't. And there would be sort of like the one-way doors like in the Emmy rooms.
Yeah.
Ways to escape other players. And ultimately, this is just sort of a work in progress, but to my knowledge, there's not anything like this out there. And I think that Fusion is uniquely positioned with both the wide variety of upgrades that are available and also the atmosphere and even just the setting to create actually a really cool multiplayer experience. And of course, you can tack on if you want to do team deathmatch or something, maybe you enable that or something as an additional mode, or I don't know. There are all kinds of places you can go with it. But what I primarily envision is a free-for-all deathmatch where players have completely different and somewhat randomly generated, essentially movesets in a way because you don't know what upgrade you're going to get. So that's my pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's any, because it's basically a battle royale, but I'm trying to figure out, are there any side-scrolling battle royales?
Not to my knowledge.
I mean, there might be,
and it's
but
not
it
even
might be
100 players. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's just an 8-player, maybe a little more, maybe 12 or something. But
yeah,
depends. Well, I guess it depends on the map and the game, because obviously if it's completely remade, they can adjust things. And they have to be somewhat customized to multiplayer. But
yeah.
it's an interesting concept. I think you could still do things like even like King of the Hill and stuff like that if you kind of put out right, or do some form of like oddball. Or not oddball. Is it oddball? Or the what's the one where you have no, the one where you have to hold the item and
Isn't that oddball?
I think it's oddball.
Yeah.
Anyway, do something like that where you have like some special, weapon or something that, but it's like only short range or something. I mean, every game has some form of that. I know in
Yeah.
Splatoon they had this like, I can't remember what it was. It's weapon. You can use it as a weapon, but it's like really powerful if you hit someone. But you better hit them or you die. But you have to hold that for as long as possible too. Yeah, that's a pretty fun idea. It'd be fun to see a side-scrolling Metroid multiplayer setup because they've tried multiplayer a couple times. You've got Metroid Prime. No, Prime Hunters came out after Prime 2, didn't it?
Yeah, it was Prime 2, then Prime Hunters. So
Yeah.
Prime 2 got the like bare bones multiplayer. It was kind of fun to mess around with like my brother, but nobody was ever going to play that competitively.
No, it was definitely felt kind of tacked on, like because Halo was blowing up, and so I think they were kind of maybe pressured or just felt the need to include it because, I mean, it also came out literally the same year as Halo 2. So
Yeah.
they were like, we got multiplayer in sci-fi too, and it's like, no, I'm sorry.
With lock on, and you just sit there and
Yeah.
so you can mash A faster.
I think I remember playing it a little bit. It didn't really play very well. Prime Hunters, obviously, like everyone's got their own opinion. I was a kid, I loved Prime Hunters. I played the heck out of it, but obviously the system it was on definitely hindered its ability in a lot. Yeah,
I think it's kind of crazy that it was a hero shooter before hero shooters.
yeah. It was pretty ahead of its time. It was pretty funny. I mean, you just had to get used to the controls and obviously the graphics, but I mean, it kind of had a very Quake kind of vibe to it.
Absolutely.
Very fast paced, but yeah, you had to be willing to play that kind of game. But I played the heck out of it. I think Hunters. See, talk about games that need a remake. I could go on a whole podcast talking about that. We'll save that for like we're
next week.
No, because next week, I guess we'll tease this just a little bit though, because this is episode 10, so we're going into episode 11. We're gonna be Switch 2. Yeah, we're gonna do a special. We're gonna try and do a special video for that. So stay tuned. But we're pretty excited. That's gonna be pretty wild. So down the road though, I'd love to do a Metroid Hunters remake. That game probably needs it even more than Fusion, to be fair.
Oh, absolutely, it does.
And
absolutely.
and I think it kind of deserves to because Prime 4 looks like it's going to use some of, at least with Silex, it's going to utilize Hunters. And even Metroid Prime 3 was kind of alluding to Hunters when it had Noxus and, oh man, I can't remember everything.
It was Gandrada, Gore, and Rundus.
Rundus, sorry, not Noxus, Rundus. And, man, there's just so much potential there. But yeah, so back to Fusion though, and the multiplayer, I think that'd be really fun. I think also you could do like an SAX mode, which is kind of like either like an infection mode or kind of like, I don't know.
I kind of like that idea. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, because I mean, you're the X, you're trying to infect them, but there's also, what was that? There was that game where one person played like a dinosaur or something, and then
wasn't it like Evolve or something like that?
You might have been, but yeah, it was basically four players against one like mega monster.
Asymmetrical PvP is honestly like a really cool idea.
Yeah,
and my understanding is some games have actually done it quite well. I've never played them, but I kind of like to see Nintendo take a crack at that.
Well, what'd be interesting too is like imagine you have a Metroid multiplayer game where you actually get to build your loadout before you go in.
Yeah.
So you actually you get like maybe 2 or 3 power ups, and there's the basic power ups, and then like upgraded power up. Well, you can get upgraded ones throughout the map, or if there's a special mode where it's like it's super battle royale where all the power ups are at like their max mode, and you just get to just go wild. Kind of like a Halo Infinite has like a Super Fiesta. Like I love playing Super Fiesta and Halo Infinite, where it's just everyone has random weapons is at the start, and you do regular Fiesta, it's just all like just every weapon. But Super Fiesta, they have all these modified version weapons they're just crazy overpowered. Like just I don't know how to put it, but like even the plasma pistol's good, and
wow, that's saying something.
Well, yeah, it just shoots stupid fast. And so there's that kind of stuff you could do with Metroid, but I don't know. The sky's the limit. I think that's the beautiful thing about Metroid is that they really haven't tapped into everything that it can do. I think there's so much more opportunity. It's just we need you guys to start buying the games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
Everyone just go buy Metroid Prime 4. Actually, buy 2 copies. Buy the Switch 1 copy and a Switch 2 copy. And then tape one to the wall or something like that.
Yeah, put one in a frame it and put it on the wall, and then yeah, the other one you play, and then buy some for your friends.
Yeah,
They don't even have the Switch or Switch 2.
exactly. It's just that good of a game. You can just stare at it and have fun.
Yeah, no, definitely Metroid needs some love. I think and multiplayer could be what brings it in. It has to be done right. Obviously, Prime 2 didn't do it. Prime Hunters didn't do it. Federation Force definitely didn't do it.
I still feel like the core concept of playing as a squad of galactic marines sound in the Metroid universe sounds like a great idea. It was just executed suboptimally. Let's say.
It was executed suboptimally, and it just was the worst time to release
Yeah,
that
it
game.
was.
It's just after being starved for Metroid content, to get that as our next game was pretty heartbreaking.
Like if we could get like co-op Republic Commando, like Star Wars Republic Commando, but it's Metroid, I mean, that would be pretty good.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, there's so much you could do, and I think spin-offs do need to exist. We can't just have mainline Metroids forever, but we just, that's why I think the remake idea is kind of fun, because it gives them a chance to kind of revisit a setting, a storyline, but still kind of create a new game. And I'd be really curious to see whether it's Mercury Steam or another studio. I don't know. I think Mercury Steam, they've done really, really good with Dread and Samus Returns, but it'd be cool to see if another studio could come in, because I know Mercury Steam's probably wants to work on things other than Metroid sometimes. But
Yeah, they did have one game in the works that wasn't Metroid that I heard about. And I think we only knew the code name at last I looked, but I don't know. I have such a hard time believing that you make the best-selling Metroid game of all time and then don't go back for Metroid 6 or a remake.
yeah.
Like, that just seems so weird to me. But I don't know. Like, Nintendo works in mysterious ways, so.
Well, we'll see how Prime 4 does. I really, really hope that it does well, because the Prime franchise needs it. It's Metroid Prime, Metroid as a series needs it. And we've seen with Pikmin, it's possible. Just need a good selling console, some good marketing. And the Metroid's always done better in the West than it has done in Japan.
Yeah, so I guess our listeners actually have been doing their part in buying the game, if they're listening in America.
Yeah,
and Europe,
true.
potentially.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's so much. I'm trying to think of what else. I'm trying to get back on the Fusion topic.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think, because we talked about multiplayer, and yeah, story wise and gameplay wise. But I feel like we've talked a little bit, like padding it out a little bit with finding the SAX. But like, what are some other ways you think you could? Because that's the one thing about that game, is it is very short.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I replayed it again recently, and I was shocked at how quickly I was able to beat that game. It'd be really fun to find ways to broaden it, and like, again, to give you more reason to revisit some of these maps, these locales. Make the maps bigger so there's more to explore. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think that you could sort of, and I'm not exactly one that likes the idea of copying, but I think that there is something that you could learn from it. You could follow like the Dead Space sort of formula, where like the original one, where there was always something going on, and that's sort of what Fusion does. But sort of like, think about all the things that are part of a space station that could potentially go wrong, and find a unique way to make them go wrong, and maybe a boss you fight, and maybe include a few more, like not many more, just maybe one or two of the bosses that like sort of recur. So like, for example, the box security robot, you fight a couple times. If they had like maybe you have more than one encounter with Nightmare, for example. Maybe like the first time you break his gravity engine, and maybe the second time you actually finish him off. I think that there are some options there where you could drag out some encounters, or make it sort of unique in that way, and different from Fusion, like the base Fusion. But I mean, apart from adding like sort of side quest-esque content, or the order in which you can do things, I don't know that there is really all that much that you really could do with the limited story and setting. You know what I mean? Like aside from just adding more disasters to avert.
Yeah, disaster to revert or repair. Yeah, because I was thinking like one thing that'd be kind of fun that you could do. It's kind of in a way almost adding another world without adding a whole new world. Is that imagine something breaks on the outside of the space station.
Oh, so you get to go in space for a
You
little
get
bit?
to go in space for a little bit, so you get some like 0G, but like you still have enough gravity from the station itself, but basically like everything's higher and slower, and you actually have to fight or escape the SAX out in the vacuum of space, and you actually kill one of them by like basically doing something like creating an explosion or doing something that causes it to basically blow away from the gravity of the space station. Because the SX has found a way off the space station is like breaking equipment that basically is vital to communicate with the Federation or something.
Okay, would you do the alien thing where that SAX gets picked up by the Federation or something and comes back in a later game?
Well, maybe that would be kind of tricky. That I don't know because you'd have to do that in Metroid 6. Obviously, it wouldn't be Metroid. Dread's already happened, but
Yeah.
you could. But I don't know if I mean Metroid is very heavily inspired by the Alien series, but
Yeah, and I mean you could theoretically like leave it and never pick it up, but like always have that in your back pocket to bring the X back if you ever wanted to.
I guess so. Because I was thinking you could also just have it burn up in the atmosphere going back toward the planet.
That works too. That works too.
But I mean that would just be kind of cool way to like explore the ship even more. Like I just love the idea. Like I know the only time I can think of you being in space is like obviously in the beginning of Metro Prime 1, you're in the space station, you start kind of outside, but it kind of gets this vibe of like you're in some kind of force field. I mean, the gravity feels completely normal when you're there. Metroid Prime 3 have that abandoned ship, but you're in the ship.
There is like the one cinematic where Samus gets blown out in the beginning of Metroid Prime 3 and she's like sort of scooting by the side and then she like grabs a ladder and like uses that to get up back in. So but it's a cinematic, it's not like a playable moment.
Yeah, but like, because like in Halo 2, how you actually get that part in the beginning of the game where you get to actually go out and like you're in space and everything's set, the sound changes,
Yeah.
and you jump changes. Like that's kind of what I'm envisioning, but for Metroid, where you're on the space station. Now, obviously in side scrolling, it's one thing. It'd be cool to see it in the Prime game too, but just from a Fusion perspective, like yeah, it's like just trying to destroy communication arrays so that the Federation can't come in.
That's actually a really cool idea. I love it. I love it. And they should
Yeah.
include that. One thing that you could do is, and granted, maybe this is better for like a 3D space environment, but if you needed a way to like propel yourself around or like get from one platform to another, leveraging the grapple beam as like you could grapple onto the side of the station, like very specific points and sort of launch yourself or something would be actually kind of a cool mechanic.
Okay, now you just got me thinking of another mechanic that you can do while inside the space station, and just for future Metroid games in general, is you use the grapple beam to actually accelerate yourself and initiate the speed booster a certain way.
Oh, that actually is really cool. So there was one that actually is that the Metroid podcast mentioned at one point, which was being like using the grapple beam to do hard turns.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like when you're doing speed booster or like potentially even shine spark. And so you could redirect if you needed to.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, it actually sounds like a really great idea. And that might be the place to implement it, to be
Have they
honest.
used speed booster in any like Prime game?
No.
See, I wonder how they would implement that. I feel like that's like the next thing. If they can figure out a way to do that, that's the one ability they haven't.
Yeah, like what I would love to see is sort of like a dash/melee/shoulder charge that you like hold and then allows you to go into speed booster.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But I love the idea of like basically you can either run to speed boost or you can like grapple something and then just basically like you're retracting the beam, which kind of like gives you the extra boost to like just initiate a speed boost on in less space. But you have to have certain you can't grapple to anything. Like you have to grapple to certain things so it's still within the reins of like the game's trying to still navigate you a certain way, but now it's kind of cool. And in certain fights, you can do it where you're like, you grapple towards it. Actually, that'd be so cool. You can grapple certain enemies, pull yourself toward it, and as you pull yourself toward them, it basically speed boosts through them.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's actually like a phenomenal idea. Kind of like how there's the it's not quite the same, but it's the secret kill for X-37, I think, the experiment in Dread, where you can activate Speed Booster mid-fight and like kill it.
That's
like
so
early,
cool.
kind of like how you can kill Kraid early with bombs. If you happen to have bombs at that time, if you sequence break. So I don't know. It just like I think it just goes to show that you and I just sitting here like bouncing ideas back and forth, and we come up with like new stuff. Just shows how much potential Metroid has, and specifically untapped potential. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's they haven't even come close to exhausting what you could do.
And we're just talking still, I feel like even now we're still limiting ourselves within the realm of what Metroid has been or could be. Like we're using certain things that already exist, but the people at Nintendo are crazy and I don't know what they smoke over there, but they come up with like just ideas out of just thin air.
Yeah.
They're just like, "Yep, we're going to implement this ability." And it's like I never would have thought of that. It's something completely original and new. And that's what I love seeing from Nintendo, and I do hope they bring that to the new games and, everything going forward. But well, I think we've talked a lot about Metroid Fusion,
Yes, we have.
more than I realized we could, and that's awesome. I hope everyone listening really enjoyed that. If you're a Fusion fan, please leave a comment, a like. Just reach out. We'd love to know what your thoughts are on Fusion and our ideas, what ideas you may have, because we love sharing that stuff. And maybe even for other Metroid games, if you have any other ideas for in the future, or other Nintendo games you would love to see us kind of brainstorm ideas for, let us know. Anyway, but this has been the Super Dandori Bros Podcast. I'm Leighton. He's Ryan. And we'll talk to you again next week with Around the Switch 2.
All right. See ya.
Bye.